Hello, I'm Johnny Dorman, and today I will present Japanese coded communications in World War II, the key to understanding the Pacific Theater. Shortly before the United States entered World War II, the Navy failed to anticipate the impending attack on Pearl Harbor, exposing weaknesses in American signal intelligence. Just 6 months later, Commander Joseph Rochefort successfully translated Japanese communications, revealing Midway as the next target. Admiral Nimitz used this intelligence to meet the enemy and turn the tide in the Pacific War. Oh, good evening. I'm retired Rear Admiral Edwin Layton. I just got back from the 10th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack. I dug up this old newspaper and read it. What a horrible day it was. We did not understand the Japanese coded communications, and we failed to communicate what we did know. Amazingly, just 6 months later, we had the intelligence, we communicated this intelligence to the people who could use it, and in turn, they understood its importance and acted upon it. You see, my good friend, Commander Rochefort, led Station Hypo from the Pearl Harbor attack through the Battle of Midway. Rochefort played a major part in both battles. Let's join Admiral Kimmel, the commander of the 14th District, right after the last congressional hearing about the Pearl Harbor attack. Every day while he was at Pearl, Commander Rochefort emerged from his basement dungeon to greet me. He hand-delivered a communications intelligence report on the enemy's naval communications received in the previous 24 hours. At the time, Rochefort's people could only translate about 10% of each communication. Most of what we knew came from radio direction finding to locate enemy ships. However, the Japanese carrier attack group was under radio silence, so there was no way we could have known they were coming. Now, many messages in the Japanese diplomatic code pointed directly to war. Hypo's superiors in Washington were supposed to be decoding these messages. Washington even had a purple machine which did all the decoding for them. If Washington had been doing their jobs and communicating effectively with those of us at Pearl, we could have saved over 2,000 lives on December 7, 1941. We eventually found out that the Army saw something in this and didn't warn us. On the morning of the attack, 2 Army enlisted men, George E. Elliott Jr. and Joseph Lockhart, were finishing up the night shift at the Army radar station on Okinawa Point, about 20 miles north of Pearl City. A huge blip showed up on their oscilloscope, so Elliott told their superior, Lieutenant Kermit Tyler. Tyler said that they were probably the B-17s coming in from San Francisco. They had the intelligence, but they failed to communicate. The blip was the Japanese attack force. The Army never told us what Elliott saw on the radar, even though later we were trying to find the Japanese fleet so that we could retaliate. Army-Navy communications had completely broken down. Even after these joint congressional meetings, no one fully understands what happened on December 7, 1941. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Station Hypo finally had enough people to run all their divisions. However, everyone at Hypo still worked 8-day weeks, 7 days on, 1 day off. Another thing that helped Rochefort and Station Hypo was that the Japanese did not change their code in the months leading up to the Battle of Midway, as they had before the attack on Pearl Harbor. The largest problem Hypo's analysts faced was the lack of radio traffic in the codes they were trying to break. However, the Doolittle raid of April 18, 1942 created a flood of traffic, which allowed analysts to assign meanings to 20 to 30% more of the code groups. The analysts were then able to decode the critical messages, revealing Midway as the next target. Communications was the key to understanding the Japanese plans and led America to its success at the Battle of Midway. Let's hear what Admiral Nimitz had to say about the Midway attack on its 5th anniversary. In May of 1942, Station Hypo decoded parts of several messages recalling Japanese ships to assemble at the island of Truk in the South Pacific. This tipped off Rochefort and others that the Japanese were about to mount another major attack. The question was, where were they going to attack? The Washington station thought the Japanese might attack anywhere from Samoa in the south to Hawaii or Johnson Island in the north. However, in some of the messages, the target was specified as AF. AF was one of hundreds of geographical designators used by Japan during the war. As early as April 1942, it was determined that the first letter of a designator signified what country it had been occupied by before the war. Designators starting with A have been determined to signify American islands. In March of 1942, Hypo, the Washington office, and our allies in England agreed that AF represented Midway Island. However, by May, the Washington office thought it was a trick and that the Japanese had changed their system. The Brits had replaced their staff, so they had no clue. Thankfully, I understood and trusted Rochefort's communication and sent our carriers Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet to intercept the fleet near Midway. One of the things that helped me make this decision was that I allowed Rochefort to send a message on May 18th with instructions via undersea cable to Midway. The radio operators there were to send an unencoded flash message reporting that the desalination plant was broken. 2 days later, Tokyo Naval Intelligence sent a message reporting that AF Air Unit had sent a message to Hawaii reporting it only had 2 weeks' worth of fresh water and asking for immediate resupply. However, Washington still thought it was radio deception, and the Japanese, their invasion fleet included 2 transport ships full of fresh water. As it was, our carriers were in the perfect position to ambush the Japanese fleet. We sank 4 of their best carriers and downed 300 of their best pilots who had trained for years before the war. The Japanese were never able to replace these pilots. The Battle of Midway ended a 6-month-long streak of Japanese victories and turned the tide in the Pacific War. This culminated in the eventual defeat of the Japanese air and naval forces, leaving the Japanese mainland virtually unprotected. In 1985, Joseph Rochefort was posthumously awarded the Navy Distinguished Service Medal by President Ronald Reagan, finally receiving the recognition he deserved. Shortly before the United States entered World War II, the Navy failed to anticipate the impending attack on Pearl Harbor, exposing weaknesses in American signal intelligence. Just 6 months later, after the colossal intelligence blunders that led to the Pearl Harbor disaster, Captain Joseph Rochefort successfully translated Japanese coded communications, revealing Midway as the next target. Knowing this, Admiral Nimitz understood Japanese intentions at Midway and turned the tide in the Pacific War.